Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, I'm back now with part 3 of my shelf by shelf video series. A look at my bookshelves, and this will be the last 2 shelves of bookshelf number 1, which I think there are 5. So let's just get right into it. So on this next shelf here, we have first we have my Michael Cisco section. I have mentioned Michael Cisco before, mainly way back when on my first or second major video series when I covered City of Chaos, because that game reminded me a lot of one of my favorite books of all time, and that is The Divinity Student. This is one of my rarer books here. It is signed and pretty limited, and just an absolutely fantastic novel. You can get The Divinity Student also in this collection here called the San Beneficio Canon, which includes the Divinity Student and its sequel, The Golem. And I believe that this is still available. It is just an absolutely mind-blowing, just creative journey into this very weird, very dark. It reminded me a little bit of Vampire Hunter D in some ways. It's bizarre. It's fantastic. So well written. Michael Cisco's prose style is just incredible. Super good. But then we have, let's see, I just got this little chapbook here from Midnight Press. Do you mind if we dance with your legs? I have no idea what this is about, or really anything about this, like when he actually wrote it. This was a limited edition of 250, and it went to a charity. I can't remember what charity it was. Probably LGBT, yeah. So a portion of the proceeds from the sale of this chapbook will be donated to the Los Angeles LGBT Center, a nonprofit organization that provides counseling, medical care, and even housing to members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community who are in need. Always a good thing to do when you can support charity and get something that you like in return. And then here we have, this is a book that was kind of recently published, but it's actually one of his older novels, so I'm really looking forward to reading it. This was supposed to come out a long time ago, but it got held up for some reason. Now, I will be honest with Michael Cisco. There's a point in his career that I don't know if I like the path that he's on right now. I haven't liked much of the things he's done after this certain point. So I'm looking forward to reading this, because while it was recently published, it is an older book of his. And same as this one here, The Knife Dance. Just from the look of it and the art and just kind of like the way the book is laid out, it also reminds me of The Divinity Student. So I'm looking forward to this. I believe this, yeah, so this one is a signed copy, signed by only 100 copies made, and this is copy number 8. It might be my lowest number of a limited edition, but this one is also signed by the artist. And I think that also came with some little art cards. The Knife Dance did, yeah, some little plates of some of the art that you can find in the book. And then I have 2 copies of his most recent novel. Maybe I'll give one away. This is a very bizarre book. It's not even I don't know if it's even a novel. It is written as kind of a textbook. Let's see. Unlanguage is the story of a man transformed by death and by language change. The language, once understood, transforms him and transforms learning itself. One day he looks down at the hand resting on his thigh and sees that it's just an ordinary hand. What had been composed of colored light made solid goes back to being meat and blood. His body reverts to the ordinary sloshing heaviness of a regular body. The exalted vision of his eyes becomes the filmy, blurred vision of the usual kind. He slumps back into his former self. Whirlwinds of shame close on him. With a violent monkey-like energy, he racks his brain for a way back. Then it occurs to him he can still write that language. He must write his way back. Told as a structural guide to impossible grammar, Michael Cisco's Language is a brilliant, thought-provoking novel that not only pushes the boundaries of literature, but language itself. Okay, that's a little hyperbolic probably, but yeah, I have only read parts of this, and it's interesting. I'm not going to say that it's great. I think somebody on my channel recently bought this because I mentioned Michael Cisco. And I forgot that I had 2 copies, so maybe I will send one out as a contest. Stay tuned in the comments for this video here. And then this is one of his giant, this is by far the longest book he wrote at almost 800 pages. This is a completely crazy book called Animal Money, and it is all about economists making a new kind of currency. Very challenging book to read. I don't love it, but I liked some of the premises, and some of the writing is great. Very difficult. I think 2 or 3 of the characters have the exact same name for some reason. I know Michael Cisco's that kind of author. I think you could say he plays tricks on the reader. This was his first collection of short stories, The Secret Hours. So Animal Money, Member, and Unlanguage. Those are like the 3 that came after this one called Celebrate. And those are the 3 that he's kind of moved into this new style. And I'm not quite sure that I am on board with what he is doing right now. This is kind of about game theory. And then we have The Traitor, which is one of his early novels. Very good. Well written, interesting. The Narrator is kind of like his weird sci-fi war novel. I like this book quite a bit. He is surprisingly good at writing action for such a cerebral author, and an author who's so concerned with these totally out of left field ideas. He is a fantastic author, a writer of action, and The Tyrant has some incredible action scenes. Thomas Ligotti giving him praise. Anytime Thomas Ligotti praises an author, that author is worth checking out. That is a fact. The Great Lover is probably my second favorite book of his. I wish I could recommend people read this book. However, I think to get the most out of it, you need to read first The Divinity Student, The Traitor, and The Narrator, and maybe The Tyrant. Yeah, so The Tyrant, The Narrator, The Traitor, and The Divinity Student all kind of coalesce, and kind of like the threads started in those novels come together in The Great Lover. And The Great Lover actually contains one of my favorite pieces of writing of all time, and I'm going to read that here. So it says, people must hurt each other as inevitably as they breathe. Nothing can stop it. It's not enough to accept it. Accepting it is not enough, like sighing resignedly and putting on an attitude of long suffering. Don't get to be too good at protecting yourself. You've got to be ripped to pieces for the one you love again and again. That doesn't prove anything but love, and its entitlements are a frailty that can't be held. But you will live even in that hell. The fire that hurts you gives off light like any other fire that illuminates beautiful things, and that is beautiful itself. This book is just fantastic. Totally bizarre. There are characters who interject, claiming that they aren't characters in the book. There is a sentient map that talks to you as the reader, and it's his books are, like I've said before, his books are like puzzles that don't really have a solution. And Celebrant is almost like a James Joyce novel in the way that it plays with language, and the book actually kind of starts right here on like the front page, I think that's called. It starts before you even get to the title and the copyright information, and then you get this really bizarre timeline because the book is like, it's very hard to describe, but it parts of this book kind of trail off into gibberish, and he plays with the printed page a lot, and very nice. And then I have this super rare collection of his first his first 4 novels: Divinity Student, The Golem, The Tyrant, The Traitor, and then a expanded version of Secret Hours. And this was from, was it Centipede Press, I believe? Yeah, Centipede Press. They put out amazing collections. I'm waiting for Michael Cisco to become as sought after as Thomas Ligotti, because if he does, this thing will be like my retirement. If you guys look at Thomas Ligotti, you can tell how expensive his earlier volumes have become over the years, and it hasn't quite happened yet to Michael Cisco, so I'm crossing my fingers hoping it does, because I would just like to have something that valuable. But for some reason, Michael Cisco is still like super underground. I don't get it. He's such a great writer. He deserves to be far more read. And then we have a little Ray Bradbury section, the Toynbee Converter, Medicine from Melancholy and Other Stories, short story collection, The Golden Apples of the Sun, short story collection, Farewell Summer, which is his follow-up to Dandelion Wine, which is one of my all-time favorite books. Just an absolutely incredible little tale here. Excuse me. If you've never read Dandelion Wine, I highly recommend that. The Halloween Tree, great little YA novel. Perfect to read like kind of every Halloween. And then we have this just a fantastic collection, the Stories of Ray Bradbury. I believe this contains maybe a majority of the short stories. I can't say if it has everything. And then, of course, the classic, The Illustrated Man, and the bona fide masterpiece, The Martian Chronicles, which people who haven't read The Martian Chronicles probably think of it just as some like kind of a golden age sci-fi. And while it is that, it is also one of the most just dark and depressing books that I've ever read. I mean, that thing goes it's freaking harsh. I always forget how harsh Ray Bradbury can be. He can be really dark. And speaking of dark, I cannot find my copy of October Country. It's probably up in this little horror section I have. October Country is one of my favorite all-time collections of short fiction. And then we have 2 little collections here. Ray Bradbury, R is for Rocket and S is for Space. And then we have a Borges collection, the collected fiction. I have not read all of this. I read a few and I really like him. I need to explore him more. Kind of, I think, probably magical realism. I guess you would probably call him surrealist, maybe. And then we have the boxing stories from Robert E. Howard, The Iron Man. Picked this up this is a Donald M. Grant publication. So people into books know Donald M. Grant. He was responsible for a lot of really early collected volumes, collector issues of like Stephen King stuff. But Robert E. Howard, he wrote all kinds of fiction: wrestling fiction, boxing, pirate, fantasy. He was a workman's author, or workaday author. All right, and now, take a look at this little stack. So this is a book that I should have mentioned on my Weird West series, and that is Mad Amos Malone, The Complete Stories. This recently was put together, this collection, I believe. Yeah, 2019. From Alan Dean Foster. People my age, I don't know if younger readers really know Alan Dean Foster, but if you're like 35 or older, 40 or older, you definitely know Alan Dean Foster, because he was the guy who wrote like the novelization for like every movie that came out. When I was younger, my family, we didn't go to a lot of movies. We didn't have a ton of money. Movies were always expensive. So I would often read, to be able to talk to my friends at school, I would go to the library, and if there was a book, a novelization of the movie, chances are it was written by Alan Dean Foster, and I would read it. And I believe I read I think he did the novelization of Alien and Aliens, if I'm remembering correctly. And I read both of those before seeing the movie, because I wasn't allowed to see rated R movies at the time. But I could read the books. So, and his fantasy series, Spellsinger, is fantastic. Well, let me back. I remember it being fantastic. I haven't read it in a long time, but I love the premise. A janitor gets teleported into a fantasy world, and he uses like he becomes like this heavy metal bard, and he sings songs like Purple Haze and Mist comes into being. So yeah, Alan Dean Foster, pretty cool author. Haven't read him in years, but I've actually never read the Mad Amos Malone. This by Jeff Ryman, 253, really interesting novel. It was, I believe, one of the very first hypertext stories that was released on the internet way back in the day. Super early hypertext and flash fiction released on the internet. They collected it into a book. I think it works better on the web, and I think it's still available, but basically it is it's about a subway, and each little page is all about all the people who are riding the subway on this particular day when something happens. And it's kind of an interactive fiction, especially when you read it online, because you can click around the train car and see where different people are residing and what they're thinking of and who they're sitting next to. So here we have the train cars, and you can kind of see like who's sitting where. And so really interesting. I'm not sure if it's exactly successful as a novel, but as an idea and as something you can just pick up and read a little bit of. Very interesting, and I don't hear it talked about a lot. The next up we have this Mick Farren. I don't know really anything about him except for this DNA Cowboys trilogy. The Quest of the DNA Cowboys, Synaptic Manhunt, and The Neural Atrocity. This is I think one of the great works of new wave science fiction. It's totally bizarre, kind of real 70s. Written between practically nonstop in 1975 and 1976. The DNA Cowboys trilogy offers fantastic adventures into the unknown and unexpected. With influences that range from Star Trek to Kung Fu, and from the Marquis de Sade to Sam Peckinpah, Farron has created a bizarre universe populated with preteen dictators, huge twin-brain domestic lizards, and growing biocomputers tended by martial arts practicing monks. This is a fantastic series, highly recommended. And I've got 3 crime fictions from George Pelecanos, one of the showrunners on The Wire. And his crime fiction is fantastic. He writes a lot, and I've only read a small fraction of it. All right, well, this video is going to be long, so sorry, guys. I hope you were in for the long haul on this one. All right, so now we're at the last shelf of this shelf here, and we have a Theodore Sturgeon collection. So these big books that you're seeing here are his a collection of all of his short stories. Theodore Sturgeon is one of my favorite science fiction authors. from the Golden Age, and he worked all the way up through the New Wave and continued to push boundaries his entire career. Excuse me, sorry. Choking up a little bit talking about Sturgeon. No. He was super progressive. He was one of the first science fiction authors to tackle the ideas of homosexuality in a positive light. His motto was "Ask the next question." He was an author who was always curious about probing things that especially were taboo to people at his in cultural ideas that were considered like off-putting or taboo. He was always interested in just kind of prodding his readers and making you think about things. And there are not a lot of authors like Sturgeon. He had an agenda. So if you don't like artists with an agenda, you probably won't like Sturgeon. Although not every story had an agenda. But he was really interested in using science fiction as a lens to examine humanity and the things that we hold dear. One of his famous stories is called "If All Men Are Brothers, Would You Let One Marry Your Sister?" And it was in Harlan Ellison's just absolutely famous collection called Dangerous Visions, one of like the great classic science fiction collection of short stories. And that book tackles the idea of a planet, of a race of beings who practice incest. Just a really fantastic author who was not afraid to push boundaries of like what people who were into science fiction would be into. You know, people who wanted to pick up these magazines and just read about laser guns and robots. He would be like, no, we're going to challenge some of your preconceived notions about things. But this is a collection starting from his very first story ever published all the way up to the last story he published. So whenever you deal with these kinds of books that are just in chronological order, you know, usually like the author doesn't really find his stride until about halfway through. And like the first book, not so great. Microcosmic God has some good stuff. The title story, Microcosmic God, is fantastic. Killdozer starts to get pretty good. I would say that it's volume 4 here. The Thunder and Roses is where he really picks up. The Perfect Toast, Baby is 3. Baby is 3 was a novella that he eventually developed into his fantastic novel, More Than Human. And then The Saucer of Loneliness, great collection. Each one of these has an introduction written by a different science fiction author. Bright Segment, and Now the News, The Man Who Lost the Sea, Case and the Dreamer, Slow Sculpture, and The Nail in the Oracle. So I have definitely not read all of these. He was a prolific writer. Hit and miss, but for the most part, he was right on. This is probably my favorite novel from him, To Marry Medusa, which was also titled The Cosmic Rape. Just a fantastic novel. I read this thing in a single bus ride home one year. It was this torrential storm up here in Seattle, and it took so long to get home that the freeway was just completely backed up. It was kind of scary, but I read this the entire way home, and I started and finished it on a single bus ride, and I ended up like really liking that bus ride because of it. The Dreaming Jewels, fantastic novel here. I look upon Sturgeon with a secret and growing jealousy, Ray Bradbury. When Ray Bradbury says that about somebody, pay attention. And then this book here is probably my second favorite novel of his, and this is one that not a lot of people really like at all, but it's called Godbody, and it is almost pornographic in its depictions of sex. However, it's doing it for a point. It's about this deity that basically comes to Earth and teaches humanity how to love each other through the act of sexual intercourse. And It's really good. It's so well written. Let's see, what does Stephen King have to say? Theodore Sturgeon was and is one of the greatest writers of science fiction and fantasy who ever lived. I can't recommend his work too highly. You will do more than enjoy. You will be increased. I believe that. But if Robert A. Heinlein wrote the introduction for this, Agape and Eros, The Art of Theodore Sturgeon. He was very progressive in his ideas of sex, far more than any of his contemporaries. Famously, I think he lived with Heinlein, I believe, and for a short time he lived with L. Ron Hubbard. And as the myth goes, he was there when L. Ron Hubbard and Heinlein and Sturgeon were talking about the idea of making money through starting a religion. And L. Ron Hubbard went on to do Scientology. So really interesting guy. This is a book about him and another book, so a couple studies that I have of him. And then finally we have a few of the comic books that I still own. We'll get to some more later, but this is the Dark Horse version of Akira. I have volume 3 in my bedroom because I'm reading through it again. I read Akira every few years. I used to have the Marvel Epics colored version, which was fantastic, but I sold that. And it's one of the few things that I've sold that I regret. I think Akira is just a brilliant work of post-apocalyptic manga, and Katsuhiro Otomo's art is, in my opinion, untouchable. I think he's the best manga artist. His cities are just fantastic. His technical drawings, his characters are super expressive. His page layouts are evocative. He directs and writes action better than any other comic book artist I know of. Nothing but incredibly high praise for Akira. It's a classic. It's something that I return to time and time again, and I'm always discovering new things. So, all right, well, guys, sorry, that was a really long video. 2 shelves. We went from Michael Cisco to Ray Bradbury, George Pelecanos, Theodore Sturgeon, which we will revisit Theodore Sturgeon again. This is not even close to my Sturgeon collection. These are just some of the oversized books. And then into some comic books with Akira. So, all right, guys. Well, take it easy. I hope you found some cool books to check out, and let me know if you've read anything from these authors or if you like this kind of stuff. And we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.